he scurried off, I couldn't help but sneak another look at the golden boy standing across the muddy tarmac from me. His slender hip leaned against the fuselage of a nearby Huey, and his dirty blonde hair looked pristine, like it hadn't been mashed for days on end under a sweaty helmet. I'd seen a man in a cigar ad recently almost as handsome as this fella. Someone had brought the magazine from home and passed it around. All the other men had paid close attention to the pages and pages of beautiful women in ads, but the cigar man had been all I'd needed. And now, here was better. Live and up close. I'd heard our new medics had recently arrived, and I was betting this guy was one of them. That gave me all the excuse I needed to introduce myself. I crossed the tarmac toward him slowly, keeping my steps unhurried while my heart raced ahead of me. Up close, he was even more beautiful than I realized. His eyes a blue that made me think of summers at the lake, and his clothes were clean, still smelling of soap instead of sweat and blood and war. If anything, it made him seem more vulnerable. At my approach, he pushed off the truck, straightening. He was taller than I expected, his shoulders strong and arms corded with wiry muscle. I dropped my eyes to the name across his chest. Wilde. My eyebrows twitched, wondering just how much the moniker suited him. "You my new medic?" I asked. He nodded. "Sure am. Liam Wilde." He reached out a hand to me. I took it. My first thought was how delicate this man's fingers were as my own closed around them. They were long and thin and seemed completely ill-suited for the jungle. But then he squeezed, and I felt the firmness of his grip, the surety of his strength. It surprised me. Maybe there was more to this kid than I'd expected at first sight. He cleared his throat, and I realized that I hadn't yet introduced myself. I'd just been standing there, holding on to his hand like it was some sort of lifeline to another world that only existed in daydreams. "I'm Major Weston Marian," I told him, my voice sounding gruff to my own ears. He smiled, shifting the cigarette from one side of his mouth to the other, and I found myself mesmerized by the movement. "Nice to meet you," he said. "Any tips for the new guy?" I wrenched my eyes to meet his. I waited a beat, wondering how honest I should be. I decided to go with the truth. "Stay safe." My answer must have surprised him because his brows rose. For a moment I saw a flash of vulnerability cross his face, as if I'd broken some sort of code. Like we weren't supposed to talk about the reality of where we were and what we were doing, that death stalked us at every turn. "How?" he asked. "Stay next to me." I almost said the words, almost. I shook my head at the absurdity of that thought. "That's what we're all trying to figure out, Doc," I told him. I didn't wait for him to respond, but instead turned on my heel and stalked to my tent. I felt somehow unsteady, my pulse too fast and my cheeks too hot, my uniform dirty and uncomfortable. "He's not for you," I reminded myself. "None of them ever will be." I used that reminder to push thoughts of Doc Wilde from my mind for the rest of the day. But at night, the rules were different. Getting some shut-eye was always easier with something nice to think of, and Doc Wilde was the nicest thing around.